She was worth $3 billion. He fixed broken washing machines for a living. They had nothing in common except the specific, suffocating weight of loss, the kind that doesn't go away, that just gets quieter as the years pile on top of it. Nobody who knew either of them would have predicted what happened next. Nobody would have believed it. And honestly, there were moments when neither of them believed it either. If you've ever loved someone and then had to figure out how to keep living without them, stay with me. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain started around 8 and didn't quit. Liam Carter stood at his kitchen sink washing the same coffee mug he'd already washed twice, watching water streak down the window in crooked lines, listening to the sound of the television coming from the living room where Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch again. The news was on. Some anchor was talking about interest rates or a city council vote or something else that had nothing to do with Liam's life, and the sound of it, that low professional drone, was the closest thing to company he had most evenings. He dried the mug, set it on the counter, picked it up again and put it in the cabinet. Outside, thunder moved through the sky like furniture being dragged across a floor. He was 32 years old, and most nights felt like this. The dishes, the television, the particular silence of a house that used to be louder. He wasn't unhappy exactly. He'd gotten past unhappy a while ago. What he was now was something closer to settled, not in the comfortable way, but in the way sediment settles at the bottom of still water. Heavy, quiet, not going anywhere. He walked into the living room and looked at his son. Ethan was 7, and he slept the way only children sleep. Completely, shamelessly, one arm dangling off the couch cushion and his mouth open just slightly. He was wearing a shirt with a dinosaur on it that he'd had since he was 5 and still refused to give up, even though the hem had frayed and one of the sleeves had a small iron burn in it from an accident Liam still felt guilty about. His dark hair was pushed sideways across his forehead. He looked like his mother. He always looked like his mother. Liam stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Then he turned off the television, got the blanket from the armchair, the green one that used to be Sarah's, and draped it over Ethan without waking him. He left the small lamp on in the corner. Ethan didn't like total darkness. Hadn't since the funeral, 3 years ago, and Liam had never pushed it. He was back in the kitchen, thinking about whether he had enough bread for Ethan's lunch tomorrow, when the knock came. 3 knocks. Firm. Not frantic, but not casual either. Liam frowned. He checked the clock on the microwave. It was 9:47 p.m. He wasn't the kind of person who got visitors at 9:47 on a Wednesday. He wasn't really the kind of person who got visitors, period, outside of his friend Marco dropping by occasionally or his mother calling from Phoenix and threatening to visit but never actually doing it. He went to the front door and looked through the peephole. For a second, he thought he had the wrong angle, or the lens was fogged, because the woman standing on his porch in the rain, in what looked like a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than his truck, with her dark hair wet and plastered to her cheek and her arms wrapped around herself, that was Victoria Sterling. He knew who she was. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who she was, mostly because she lived in the house across the street that didn't quite look like it belonged there. Too large, too modern, all glass and clean angles among the older craftsman homes with their cracked driveways and overgrown hedges. She'd moved in 8 months ago and kept entirely to herself. He'd waved once from his driveway. She'd nodded and gone inside. He opened the door. She looked worse up close. Not in a way that diminished her. Her features were still sharp and composed in that way they always seemed to be in the photographs you saw of her, in business profiles and the occasional magazine piece. But her eyes were red around the edges, and she was shivering, and there was something in her expression that he hadn't expected. She looked like she was holding herself together through sheer effort, the way you hold a cracked thing that will shatter if you grip it too hard or let it go. "Miss Sterling," he said, because he didn't know what else to say. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I know what time it is. I know how this looks. You're soaked." She glanced down at herself as if she'd forgotten that detail. "I walked. I didn't want to send a car and I couldn't. I just needed to not be in that house for a minute, and then I was standing in front of yours." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She hesitated for just a beat, then stepped inside. He grabbed a dish towel from the kitchen, the only clean one he had, which was slightly embarrassing, and handed it to her. She took it with both hands and pressed it against her face, then her hair, with this careful, self-conscious efficiency that made her seem younger than she was. "Do you want coffee?" he asked. "Yes, please, if it's not too much trouble." It wasn't. He put the kettle on because the coffee maker had been broken for 2 weeks, and he hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet, which was mildly ironic given that he repaired appliances for a living. He took down 2 mugs, the nice ones, not the ones with the chips. She stood near the door for a moment, then drifted toward the counter, hugging the dish towel in front of her like it was something to hold on to. "I've been trying to decide how to say this for about 3 weeks, she said. He turned around. "Okay. I've rehearsed it a lot of different ways. None of them are good." She set the dish towel on the counter. "I'm just going to say it." "Okay," he said again. She looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark and steady now in a way her posture wasn't. "I want to have a child. I can't. I'm not able to do it alone. Not in the logistical sense, I mean in every other sense. I've thought about every other option, every other arrangement, and I keep coming back to you." The kettle was heating up. He could hear it starting to tick. "Me," he said. "I know you don't know me. I know this is insane. I want to be clear that I'm not asking you to fall in love with me or marry me or anything like that. I'm asking if you'd be willing to be a father to a child we'd have together. I'd want you involved. I'd want the child to know you, not just biologically. I mean, actually, as a father." She stopped, swallowed. "I've watched you with your son. I've watched you for months. I know that probably sounds unsettling." "A little," he said honestly. "I'm not a creep, I noticed you. When other people would have cut corners or lost patience, you didn't. You're careful with him. You're present." She paused on that word as if it meant something specific to her. "That's not as common as it should be." The kettle clicked. He poured the water without looking away from her for too long. His hands felt slightly separate from his body. "Do you have a partner?" she asked. "I should have asked that first." "No." Is there anyone?" "No." He set the mug in front of her. "There's nobody." She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked down at it. "I'm sorry. I should have led with that question." "It's fine." He leaned against the counter. His brain was doing something complicated, trying to process what she'd just said while also noticing that she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with tonight. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes?" "Why me? Specifically. Not the thing about watching me with Ethan. I mean, why not someone you know, someone from your world?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain was still coming down. "Because the people from my world would have an angle," she said finally. "Everyone I know well enough to ask would want something from it. The money, the connection, the access. They'd say they wouldn't, and they'd believe it when they said it, and then 5 years from now there'd be an angle." She looked up. "You don't need anything from me. You're not impressed by me. You barely know who I am." "I know who you are," he said. "You know what I'm worth," she said. "That's not the same thing." He didn't argue with that because she was right. "I lost my daughter," she said, and her voice changed on that, got quieter, more careful, like she was setting something fragile on a surface. "And my husband, 4 years ago. A car accident. She was 2. She picked up the mug and held it. "I've spent 4 years rebuilding everything except the part that mattered. The company is fine. Better than fine. I'm fine by every measurable standard." She didn't say it with bitterness, exactly, just a flat accuracy that was somehow worse. "But I wake up every morning and the house is quiet and I'm 47 meetings and 14 conference calls away from the only thing I actually want, and I can't get there from here alone." Liam set his own mug down. He thought about what to say and couldn't find anything that wasn't inadequate, so he said, "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Ethan was 4. She looked at him. "Cancer," he said. 11 months from diagnosis to... He stopped. He always stopped at that part. He'd learned to stop there. "So I know what it is to wake up in a quiet house." Something in her face shifted. Not softened exactly. She wasn't the softening type. He sensed that already. But some of the held-together quality relaxed slightly, like she'd been carrying something heavy, and someone had offered to take a small corner of it. "I'm not saying yes," he said. "I know. I'm saying I need to think. I need to actually think about this because what you're asking is enormous, and I have a son, and his life is involved in this, whether you intend that or not." "I know," she said again. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm asking you to not say no tonight." He looked at her for a long moment. She was still holding the mug with both hands. Her coat had started to dry. There was a slight tension around her jaw that he recognized. He'd worn it himself, the jaw you hold when you're trying not to show how much is riding on a single answer. "Okay," he said. "I won't say no tonight." She let out a breath. It was small, barely audible, but it was there. They stayed in his kitchen for another 40 minutes. She didn't push anything. She didn't try to sell it. They talked, haltingly at first, then with more ease, about the neighborhood, about Ethan, about nothing important. He found out that she hated the new coffee shop on 5th Street, which he'd secretly loved. She found out that he didn't own a single item of furniture he'd bought new, which seemed to genuinely interest her in a way he hadn't expected. When she left, she shook his hand at the door. Her grip was firm, and her hand was still slightly cold. "Thank you for the coffee," she said. "It was instant," he said. "I should mention that." She almost smiled. "I suspected." Then she walked back across the street in the rain, and he stood in his doorway watching her go, and he thought, what on earth is happening to my life? The next morning, Ethan ate his cereal and told Liam at length about a dream he'd had involving a dragon who was also somehow his teacher at school, and Liam listened and said, "Uh-huh," in the right places, and made his son's lunch and double-checked that he'd packed his library book and tried not to think about the woman across the street. He mostly failed at that last part. He spent his morning at a house 3 blocks over, replacing the heating element in a dryer for a retired couple named the Hendersons, who always offered him coffee and whose kitchen smelled like cinnamon. He was good at this work, had been doing it for 8 years since he'd learned from his uncle that there was always someone who needed something fixed and was willing to pay decently for it without asking for credentials. He'd built a client base over the years, mostly by word of mouth, mostly by being reliable and honest about what he charged, which turned out to be a low bar in his industry and a surprisingly effective business strategy. He liked the work because it was concrete. You found the problem. You fixed it. The thing worked again. There was a completeness to it that most of life didn't have. He thought about that on the drive home, about problems and whether they all had components you could isolate, test, and replace. Victoria Sterling wanted a child. She'd lost one. She was alone. She'd decided, for reasons that were more logical than they first sounded, the more he turned them over, that he was the right person to help with that. He thought about Ethan, about what it would mean to have another child in the picture, whether that child would share his last name, whether it would live across the street or across the world, whether Ethan would be confused or hurt, or no, Ethan would probably be delighted. Ethan had been asking for a dog for 2 years. A sibling would at minimum distract him from that campaign. He thought about Sarah. He always thought about Sarah when anything involving the future came up, which was something his friend Marco called asking permission from someone who can't give it anymore, which was accurate and also not particularly useful. Sarah would have had something to say about this. She would have had 17 opinions, and she would have given them to him in the wrong order with the most important one last, and then she would have said, "But it's your call," and meant it, even though they both knew it was never really just his call when she was alive. That was the thing about loving someone. The decisions didn't belong to you alone anymore, and then, when they were gone, the decisions were all yours again, and it felt less like freedom than like a limb that had fallen asleep. He picked up Ethan from school at 3:15. On the walk home, Ethan said, "Dad, do you know the lady who lives across from us?" Liam glanced down at him. A little. Why? "She was watching us from her window this morning, when we walked to school." Liam processed that. "Did it bother you?" Ethan considered this with the thoroughness of a child who takes questions seriously. "No," he said. "She looked kind of sad." Liam didn't say anything to that. "She's pretty," Ethan added, "for a grown-up." That's an interesting qualification, Liam said. What's a qualification? It means you added a condition to the thing you said. Ethan thought about it. I just meant she's not ugly pretty. She's actually pretty. I understood you, Liam said. Ethan nodded, satisfied, and moved on to telling him about something that happened at lunch involving a juice box and Tyler Marsh from his class, and Liam half listened and thought, my 7-year-old noticed she looked sad. He waited 4 days. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Some clarity, maybe, or some reason to say no that felt more concrete than just, this is not the kind of thing that happens to me. But the clarity didn't come, and the reason didn't sharpen into anything he could hold up as decisive, and on Saturday afternoon he found himself walking across the street. He rang the bell. The house was different up close, even larger. The front door was a heavy dark wood, and the intercom beside it had a small camera that he was aware of looking into. After about 15 seconds, the door opened. Victoria was wearing jeans and a cream-colored sweater and no shoes, and she was holding what appeared to be a financial report of some kind. Her hair was down. She looked less composed than she had in his kitchen, less armored maybe because she hadn't expected company. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. I wanted to talk, if that's okay. She stepped back. Come in. The interior was a lot, not in a bad way, but in the way of a space that had been designed very deliberately by someone who understood space and didn't particularly believe in clutter. High ceilings, good light, expensive furniture arranged with a kind of precision that made it look effortless, but wasn't. There were almost no personal items, no photographs on the walls, no accumulation of ordinary life. It looked like a hotel that had aspirations toward being a home, but wasn't quite there yet. She brought him to a large kitchen at the back of the house. It had a view of a small garden, and put the kettle on without asking. He sat at the island. I've been thinking, he said. I assumed, she said. I have a lot of questions. I expected that. Okay. He flattened his hands on the counter. First one, if we do this, and I'm not saying we are, how does it actually work? Not biologically, I mean the arrangement, the child's life. Where does it live? Who makes decisions? What happens if we disagree about something important? She put down the report she'd been carrying. I've thought about this a lot. I'd want the child to live primarily with me. I'd want you involved, genuinely involved, not in a once-a-month way, regularly. I'd want the child to know both of us as parents. Not as a father who's around sometimes and a mother who has custody, as two people who are both that child's parents. And if we disagree, we figure it out the same way all parents do. That's not always how it goes. No, she said evenly, it's not. I'm not going to promise you it'll be simple, but I can promise you that I won't use my money to take that child away from you. That's not what this is. He studied her. How do I know that? You don't, she said. Not yet. She poured the water. That's why I'm not asking you to agree to anything permanent tonight. I'm asking you to keep talking. To get to know each other well enough that when you decide, you're deciding based on something real. That was, he had to admit, a reasonable position. Second question, he said. Ethan. She set the mug in front of him. What about him? He's not an accessory to this arrangement. If you have a child with me, he's that child's brother. You'd be part of his life whether you wanted to be or not. I need to know you understand that. I do understand that. And I need to know you're okay with it. Not politely okay. Actually okay. She sat down across from him. I lost a daughter, she said quietly. I'm not capable of being indifferent to a child, particularly one who... She stopped herself. Particularly one who... What? She looked like she was deciding how much to say. He reminds me of her, she said finally. Not in looks, just... There's something in the way he pays attention to things. She used to do that. Pay attention like the world was genuinely interesting. Liam didn't know what to say to that. He picked up the mug. Third question, he said, because he needed to keep moving or he'd stop entirely. What do you actually know about me? You said you've been watching for months. What did you decide? She took a moment. You get up at 6 every morning. You make your son's breakfast before you make your own, every time. When you're working on something in the driveway and he comes out to watch, you stop and explain what you're doing even when you're clearly in the middle of it. You lost your temper once, in the driveway. I don't know what about. You raised your voice, and then about 30 seconds later you crouched down and talked to him for a while, and he hugged you, so it couldn't have been that bad. She paused. You're also clearly lonely, but you're not bitter about it. That matters. He stared at her. You've been very thorough. I'm building something, she said. I don't do that carelessly. Something in that, the plain, unsentimental practicality of it, landed differently than he expected. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't charming, it was just honest, in a way that was almost blunt, and he found that he respected it, even if it unsettled him. I'm going to need more time, he said. I know. And I'm going to need to tell you things about me that you might not have seen from across the street. That's the point of talking. He finished his coffee. She walked him to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. The day you saw me in the driveway, he said, I told him he couldn't come with me to a job. He cried. I lost my patience and I said something I shouldn't have, something about how not everything can be about what he wants. He paused. He was 4 when his mother died, and sometimes he just wants to be near me, and I forgot that for a minute, and I said the wrong thing. She was quiet. I'm not the patient father you've built in your head, he said. I'm trying. Most of the time I'm doing better than my worst moments, but I have them. I know, she said. That's not why I came to your door. He nodded, stepped off the porch. Liam, she said. He turned. The fact that you told me that, she said, that's part of why I came to your door. They started meeting on Thursday evenings. It was his idea. A scheduled thing felt less fraught than impromptu somehow. She'd offer coffee or occasionally tea that she clearly felt more strongly about than he did, and they'd sit at her kitchen island or sometimes in the living room and talk. The first few Thursdays were careful. They were both operating from behind glass, he felt, transparent enough to be seen, thick enough to stay safe. She asked questions that were intelligent and slightly clinical, as though she were conducting some extended evaluation, and he answered them without performing. He asked his own questions. How she'd built the company, what she was actually afraid of, what she thought the word family meant exactly, because he was starting to think people used it without really knowing. On the 4th Thursday, something shifted. He told her about the week after Sarah's funeral. The specific grinding horror of it, the casseroles from neighbors he barely knew, Ethan asking every morning when Mommy was coming home, the way he'd locked himself in the bathroom one afternoon just to sit on the floor and feel the cold tile under him because it was the one solid thing. He hadn't talked about that week to anyone except Marco, and Marco had been there for it, so he'd never had to describe it from the outside. She listened without interrupting. She didn't offer him the careful, practiced expressions of sympathy that he'd gotten used to from people who meant well but were mostly looking to wrap up their emotional obligation. She just listened. And when he stopped, she said, The bathroom floor, yes, I know that floor. And then she told him about the night of the accident. She'd been in London for a conference. She got the call at 1 in the morning and spent 14 hours on a plane knowing and not knowing, the specific suspension of a grief you can see coming but can't land yet. When she arrived at the hospital, they were already gone, both of them. And the person who'd called her, her husband's brother, had said, I'm sorry, Vicky. And she'd thought, don't call me Vicky. And then she'd thought, why am I thinking about that? And then she'd stopped thinking for a while. His name was Daniel, she said. My husband. He was an architect, not famous, just careful about things. He cared about how a room felt, what a door handle was shaped like. She was looking at her coffee. Sophie loved dogs. She'd only seen them a handful of times, and every time she saw one, she'd go completely still, like she was afraid to scare it away. She paused. She'd never been scared of anything else. She climbed everything, terrified me constantly. But dogs? She'd just hold perfectly still. Well, Liam said, Ethan's afraid of ceiling fans. She looked up. Every house we go into, first thing he does is check if there's a ceiling fan. He can't explain it. They just disturb him.
He shrugged. We don't have one in our house. She almost smiled, the same almost as in his kitchen, the first night. That's very specific. Kids are very specific, he said. That's the thing nobody tells you before you have one. I know, she said softly. And there was something in those two words, not the saying of them, but the way she said them, quiet and without self-pity, just stating the fact of a knowledge she hadn't wanted and couldn't return. That made him see her differently. Not as the figure from across the street, or the name from financial news, or the woman who'd knocked on his door with an impossible request. Just as someone who knew what he knew, who had stood on that same bathroom floor. The glass, he realized, was getting thinner. It was Ethan who accelerated things, as Ethan tended to do with most things in Liam's life. 6 weeks after the first Thursday meeting, Ethan got up from watching a movie on a Saturday morning, wandered to the front window, and announced that the lady across the street was working in her garden and looked like she didn't know what she was doing. Liam looked up from the bills he was sorting. What? She's been at the same plant for like 20 minutes, and she keeps putting it down and picking it back up. That's not how you plant things. Liam had no idea how Ethan knew how you plant things, since to his knowledge, Ethan had never planted anything. But the boy's assessment was, when he went to the window, accurate. Victoria was in the front garden in a lightweight jacket, crouching over a pot with a troubled expression, holding a small plant that she kept placing and then removing from the soil. Maybe she wants to be left alone, Liam said. Ethan considered this. Or maybe she just needs help. 15 minutes later, they were both standing on her front path. Victoria looked up from the ground. She had dirt on her hands and a strand of hair in her face and the expression of someone who had been very confident about a decision and was now not confident at all. You have the root ball too low, Ethan said. Victoria blinked. I'm sorry? The root ball. It should be even with the soil. You're burying it too deep. He walked over, crouched beside her, and with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who has absorbed some fact from some unremembered source and is now deploying it as established expertise, he adjusted the plant. Like that, see? Victoria looked at the plant, then at Ethan, then at Liam, who held up his hand slightly in a "I didn't teach him that" gesture. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, Ethan said. I'm Ethan. I know, she said. I'm Victoria. Ethan stood up and brushed dirt off his knees with great ceremony. My dad talks about you sometimes, he said. Liam felt his jaw tighten. Ethan, not bad things, Ethan said agreeably. Just like that, you live over there and you're nice. He looked at the rest of the garden. Do you need help with the rest of them too? The three of them spent the next hour in the garden. Ethan was bossy and knowledgeable in that particular way of 7-year-olds who've read something once and retained it permanently, and Victoria, to her credit, took his direction with complete seriousness. She didn't talk down to him or past him. She asked him questions and listened to the answers as if they were useful, which they often were. At one point, Ethan got frustrated because she'd put a pot in the wrong place, and he tried to move it himself and couldn't because it was too heavy, and she moved it without being asked. And then he stood back and assessed it and said, Yeah, that's better, with the tone of a foreman approving a job. And Victoria caught Liam's eye over the boy's head, and there was something in her expression that he'd never seen there before. Relief, he thought, or maybe joy. He wasn't entirely sure she'd had either expression recently enough to recognize it. Walking home that afternoon, Ethan's shoes leaving small dirt prints on the pavement, Liam looked over at his son. You like her? He said. Ethan shrugged. She's okay. She listens. That's your bar for people? They listen? Ethan thought about it. It's a good bar, he said finally. Liam thought, yes, it actually is. The Thursdays continued. One evening in early April, she showed him a photograph. She didn't plan to. He could tell that from the way she hesitated before she crossed the room to get it, and the way she held it when she came back, and the slight set of her shoulders that said she was deciding whether to stay decided. It was a small framed picture, a man with an open, earnest face, not handsome in a striking way, but warm-looking, the kind of face that seemed to be in the middle of listening. And in his arms, a little girl with enormous eyes,
and a grin that was mostly gum, wearing a striped shirt, reaching for something outside the frame. "Daniel and Sophie," she said. She set the photo on the table between them and sat back, and he understood without being told that she wasn't going to say more about it than that. She'd offered the photograph. That was the thing itself. He looked at it for a long time. "She has his eyes," he said. "She did," Victoria said. "Everyone said that." He didn't touch the photo, but he stayed looking at it until she reached over and turned it slightly, the way you'd angle something toward a lamp, as if to say, "It's okay. You can see them." "I carry them," she said very quietly. "I'll always carry them. You understand that?" "I do," he said. "It's not something that competes." She looked at him. "No, it's not." He wanted to ask what she meant by that precisely, but he thought he already knew. She was saying, "I'm not replacing them. This isn't a substitution. Whatever comes next is its own thing, separate from the grief, even if the grief is what made the next thing necessary." He thought about Sarah. He thought about how he still talked to her sometimes, quietly, in the dark before he fell asleep. Not asking for direction exactly, just narrating. Keeping her updated on Ethan's growing, the state of the truck, the way the maple in the backyard had finally come back after 2 rough winters. He didn't think that was strange. He thought it was just what you did when you'd loved someone that long and didn't have a satisfying place to put it. "Can I show you something too?" he asked. She nodded. He took out his phone, scrolled to a photo he kept in a specific album, not his main camera roll, a separate one he'd made 2 years ago. He handed her the phone. It was Sarah, not a posed photo. It was from a Saturday morning. He remembered exactly, because they'd been at a farmer's market and Ethan had convinced them to buy too much corn, and she was standing in front of a flower stall in a blue jacket with her hair in a messy braid, and she was laughing at something just out of frame. And she was so alive in it, so completely there, that he still sometimes looked at the photo and felt that specific disorientation, the one where for half a second you forget, and then you remember. Victoria looked at the photo for a long time. "She's beautiful," she said. "She was terrible at sleeping," he said. "She'd be up at 2 in the morning reorganizing things, cupboards, files, whatever. I'd wake up and she'd be gone from bed, and I'd find her rearranging the spice cabinet." Victoria's mouth curved. "Why?" "She said her brain didn't slow down until everything was in order. It drove me completely insane." He paused. "I'd give a lot for the spice cabinet to be out of order right now." Victoria handed the phone back carefully, with both hands, as if it were something borrowed and precious, which he supposed it was, Achet. At the end of April, 3.5 months after she'd knocked on his door in the rain, he sat in her kitchen on a Thursday evening and said, "I've decided." She looked at him, still, waiting. "I want to do this," he said. "I'm not saying I'm not scared. I'm saying I've thought about it from every direction I can think of, and this is what I want." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were around her mug. Outside, the trees were starting to leaf out, that specific pale green of early spring that you forgot about every winter, and then were surprised by every year. "Why?" she asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He thought about it honestly. "Because I think you're a good person trying to do a hard thing," he said. "Because I think a child with both of us as parents would be okay. More than okay." He paused. "And because I think Ethan would be a good brother, and I want to give him that." She swallowed. Her jaw was doing the thing he'd learned to recognize. "There's also," he said, "the possibility that I'm starting to care about you. Not in the arrangement sense, in the actual sense. And I want to put that on the table because I don't want to pretend it's not there." She was very still. "You don't have to. I'm not putting any conditions on it," he said. "I just think you should know it's in the room." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he started to think he'd miscalculated badly. Then she said slowly, "I think it might be in the room for me too." He breathed. "But I don't know what to do with that yet," she said. "I don't know how to. It's been 4 years since I've let anything into the room. I'm not good at it anymore." "I'm not either," he said. "For what it's worth." She looked down at her mug. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay."
he said. Outside, the early spring light came through the window, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty. He told Ethan that night. He sat on the edge of his son's bed and told him, carefully and honestly, and without oversimplifying it, that he and Victoria were going to try to have a child together. That the child would be Ethan's brother or sister, that things might change, and some of the changes would be strange to get used to, and if Ethan ever had questions or it ever bothered him, he could say so. Ethan listened with his chin on his knees. When Liam finished, Ethan said, "Is she going to be around more?" "Probably, yeah." Ethan thought about it. "She still needs help in that garden," he said. "She doesn't really know what she's doing." Liam looked at his son. "I think she might surprise you." Ethan considered this. Then he lay back on his pillow and looked at the ceiling and said, with the particular gravity of a 7-year-old processing something large, "A baby is a lot of work, Dad." "I know," Liam said. "You're going to need help." "Probably." "I can help," Ethan said. "I'm good at things." "I know you are," Liam said. He pulled the blanket up and turned off the light. "Good night, bud." "Good night, Dad." He was at the door when Ethan said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Do you like her? Actually like her?" Liam stood in the doorway with the hall light behind him. He thought about what to say to a 7-year-old. He thought about what was true. "I think I do," he said. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, "Good," he said. "She looked lonely." Liam turned that word over in his mind all the way down the hall. He'd thought the same thing the first night, without using that word. He wondered when exactly his son had become someone who noticed things like that, and then he remembered he'd always been someone who noticed things like that, since before he was old enough to talk about it, since back when the only word he'd had for it was sad. Liam went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a while in the dark, looking out at the street, at the clean line of light in Victoria Sterling's window across the way. He thought, something is beginning. He thought, I don't know where it goes. And then, for the first time in a long while, he thought, that's okay. The first appointment was on a Tuesday morning in May at a fertility clinic 40 minutes outside the city, far enough that neither of them was likely to be recognized, which was Victoria's thinking and which Liam didn't argue with. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat of his truck with a leather folder on her lap containing documents he hadn't looked at, and they didn't talk much on the way there, which was fine. The silence between them had started to have a different quality over the past few weeks, less like absence, more like something comfortable that didn't need filling. The clinic was clean and understated, the kind of place designed to feel like nothing in particular, so that the weight of why you were there didn't press down too hard in the waiting room. A woman at the front desk greeted Victoria by name with that particular warmth of staff who have been briefed that a significant client is coming. Liam got a smaller smile and a clipboard. They sat beside each other and filled out their respective paperwork. At one point she leaned slightly and said quietly, "You can leave that section blank, the one about previous relationships." "I wasn't going to fill it in," he said. "Okay. But I noticed you assumed I was." She looked at him. "I was preemptively managing." "That's a very Victoria thing to say." She returned to her form. "I'm aware." The doctor was a calm, direct woman named Dr. Reyes, who explained the process with the kind of measured precision that made everything sound both completely reasonable and quietly enormous. "Tests first," she said. "Blood work, assessments, a full picture of where things stood medically before they made any decisions about approach." She looked at them both with a gaze that asked, without asking, what the arrangement was. Victoria answered it without being asked. "We're doing this together," she said. "He'll be the father and co-parent. It's not a romantic relationship, but he's fully involved." Dr. Reyes nodded as though this were the most ordinary sentence she'd heard all week. Maybe it was. "Then I'd like to assess you both," she said, "separately and together, just so we have a complete picture." Liam got his blood work done in a small room by a technician who had a podcast playing on his phone, something about true crime, and who made cheerful small talk about the weather and didn't seem at all interested in why Liam was there, which Liam found deeply, genuinely relieving. In the car on the way back, Victoria opened the leather folder and studied something in it. He drove. The spring light was doing that thing it did in May, coming in flat and bright off every surface. "Thank you for coming with me," she said, without looking up. "Of course," he said. "I mean it. I know this is strange." "It's a little strange," he allowed. "I've done everything alone for 4 years," she said. "I forgot that it's different when someone else is there." He glanced over at her. She was still looking at the folder, her profile in the light, the straight line of her nose, the slight tension around her mouth, was so particular, he thought. She had a face that held things in. You had to pay attention to catch what passed through it quickly. "Different how?" he asked. She considered it. "Smaller," she said finally. "Things feel smaller when someone else is there. Not less serious, just you're not the only thing standing between it and being too much." He didn't say anything to that, but he thought about it the rest of the drive. The results came back the following week. Dr. Reyes delivered them over a video call. Practical, not dramatic. The medical picture was more complicated than either of them had framed going in. Victoria's age wasn't a barrier on its own, but combined with some of what the blood work showed, the likely path would require more intervention, more monitoring, more patience than a straightforward process. The doctor used phrases like, "We can work with this," and "it's not impossible," with the careful honesty of someone who had learned to be accurate without being crushing. After the call ended, they sat in Victoria's living room. The garden outside the window was fully green now, the plants Ethan had helped straighten weeks ago coming in thicker than before. "Say what you're thinking," Victoria said. "I'm thinking it's going to be harder than we expected," he said. "I knew it might be." "Did you?" She looked at him. "I've tried to be realistic about this from the start. I'm 30. I'm not ancient, but I know what the odds look like." She shifted. "What I'm asking is what you're thinking about this specifically, whether it changes anything." He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think about things when it mattered. "No," he said. "It doesn't change anything, but it changes how I think about the time. This isn't going to be quick." "No. We're going to be in each other's lives more than we already are, through something that's hard and uncertain and might not work." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be sure you've thought about what that means between us." "What do you think it means?" she asked. "I think it means we have to be honest with each other, the whole time, not just about the medical stuff." She held his gaze. "I can do that." "I know," he said. "I just needed to say it out loud." She nodded slowly. Outside, a bird landed on the garden wall and sat there for a moment in the silence. The months that followed had a rhythm to them, though not a comfortable one. There were appointments, more than Liam had expected, scheduled around his work and Ethan's school and Victoria's calendar, which was dense with the ongoing business of running a company worth several $1 billion, a fact that existed alongside everything else in their lives as a constant, slightly surreal backdrop. She worked from home most days, and occasionally he'd see the lights on in her office past midnight when he took out the recycling, and once he texted her. They'd started texting, nothing significant, just the ordinary current of two people in each other's orbits, and said, "It's 1 a.m, you should sleep." And she wrote back, "I know." And then 20 minutes later, "I'm trying." And he thought about her in there, in that too large house, with all that quiet. There were good weeks, and there were weeks that scraped the bottom. One Thursday in late June, she'd come to his house instead of having him come to hers. It was Ethan's birthday, and they'd had a small thing with a couple of kids from school, and Marco, who had taken one look at Victoria and then taken Liam aside and said, with characteristic understatement, "So there's that." And Liam had said, "Don't start." And Marco had said, "I haven't said a word," in the tone of someone who had said everything. Ethan had opened his gifts with the focused delight of someone for whom birthdays were serious business, and Victoria had given him a book, a thick, illustrated nature encyclopedia, which was not the obvious gift for a 7-year-old, but which Ethan had held with both hands and said, "I don't have this one," with a gravity that made her look genuinely pleased. Afterward, when the other kids had gone home and Ethan was in bed with the encyclopedia, Liam found her in the kitchen doing the dishes without being asked. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to. I don't get to do ordinary things very often." He leaned in the doorway.
Define ordinary. Dishes, she said. Picking something up from the floor, making a grocery list. She rinsed a plate. I have people who do all of it. I've had people who do all of it for years because otherwise there's no time. But sometimes I think I've outsourced so much of the ordinary that I forgot what it felt like to just be a person in a house. I have too much of the ordinary, he said. We should have traded years ago. She handed him a wet glass without looking. Hold that. He held it. She scrubbed the next one. They stood side by side at the sink, and it was so unremarkable, so completely domestic, that he felt something in his chest do a slow, complicated thing that he didn't examine too carefully. He had a good birthday, she said. He did. The book was a guess. I wasn't sure. It was a good guess. She was quiet for a moment. I guessed because Sophie would have liked it, she said. She didn't look at him when she said it, kept her eyes on the sink. I don't know if that's strange, thinking about what she would have liked when I'm buying something for him. It's not strange, Liam said. I don't do it to mix them up. They're completely different children. You have a compass, he said, for what a child would love. And the compass was built from knowing her. That's not strange. That's just how it works. She turned off the tap, dried her hands. Still didn't look at him immediately, and he could tell she was deciding whether to say the next thing. I'm scared, she said. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you'd say I'm cold. Not of the process, of what happens if it doesn't work. I've built a very functional life around not wanting things, and this is the one thing I've let myself want in 4 years, and if it doesn't, Victoria. She looked at him. It's okay to be scared, he said. You're not supposed to be fine about this. Her jaw was doing the thing. I'm usually fine about things. I know, I've noticed. He took the dish towel from her hands, and he didn't know quite why he did it, except that she was holding it too tightly, the way you hold something when you're not sure what to do with your hands. You're allowed to not be fine about this one. She looked at him for a moment in the kitchen light. This specific moment that felt like it was in parentheses, outside the arrangement and the appointments and all the careful practical architecture they'd built. Then she said, I'm working on it. Good, he said. He handed her back the dish towel. She folded it and set it on the counter, and they moved back into the living room, and the moment closed over itself, and neither of them acknowledged it directly. But it was there. They both knew it was there. July was difficult. The first attempt didn't take, and there was a specific deflating quality to that failure that was different from the general uncertainty that had preceded it. This was concrete. A thing they had tried had not worked. Victoria processed it the way she processed most things, efficiently, without visible collapse, by redirecting into the next step. But Liam had started to be able to read the difference between her composure and her actual state. And the actual state that week was not good. He showed up at her door on a Wednesday, not a Thursday, with Ethan, who was carrying a container of leftover pasta because he had decided she probably didn't eat enough, an assessment he had arrived at independently and shared with Liam with great conviction. Liam had not corrected him. She opened the door and looked at them both. Ethan says you don't eat enough, Liam said. Ethan held up the container. It's the kind with the shells. I made it. Well, Dad made it, and I stirred it. Victoria's expression moved through several things quickly. She stepped back and let them in. They ate at her kitchen table. Ethan talked about school, about a project involving the solar system, about his considered opinion that Saturn was the best planet, and the people who said Jupiter were wrong for reasons he laid out in some detail. Victoria listened and occasionally asked questions, and ate more pasta than she probably would have alone, which was the point, though no one said so. When Ethan was in the living room looking at a book he'd pulled from her shelf, she had an entire wall of books that he treated as a personal discovery, Liam sat across the table from her and said quietly, How are you actually doing? She looked at her plate. I'm managing. I know you're managing. I asked how you're doing. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sad, she said, simply, like she was still slightly surprised by the admission. I didn't expect to be this sad about something I knew might not work the first time. I prepared for it logically. The logic isn't helping very much. Logic never does, he said, not with this stuff. I know that intellectually. You know everything intellectually. It's It's kind of your thing.
She looked up, and there was something in her expression, exasperation, but underneath it, the faint, reluctant flicker of being known. You're becoming very comfortable pointing things out about me. You said you wanted honesty. I said I could do honesty, she said. That's not the same as liking it. Fair distinction, he said. She picked up her glass. Outside, the evening was still bright, that long summer light that stretches past 8 o'clock and makes it feel like there's more time than there is. I keep thinking about Daniel, she said, about how he was when we were trying for Sophie. He was so certain it was going to work. He had this completely irrational certainty about things, about good outcomes that used to drive me insane. But looking back, she paused, I think I borrowed his certainty. I didn't have my own, but I didn't need to because his was there. And now I'm doing this without that. She wasn't tearful.
She was just stating the shape of the loss as it applied specifically to this moment, and he found that both harder and easier than crying would have been. I'll be certain for a while, he said, if that helps. She looked at him. I mean it. Somebody should be. I'll hold that part. He met her eyes. We're going to try again, and it's going to work, and you can borrow that until you feel it yourself. She was very still. Okay, he said. She looked away first, out the window, into the long light. Okay, she said quietly. From the other room, Ethan called, Dad, she has the plant book, the big one, the one I told you about. That's great, bud. Can I borrow it? Victoria called back without looking away from the window. You can have it. I bought it thinking I should know more about plants, and then never opened it. A pause. Really? Really, it's yours. The sound of Ethan's footsteps crossing to the bookshelf. The sound of a book being lifted with both hands and held with care. Liam watched her watching the window and thought that the borrowed certainty was already doing something, not fixing anything, not making the sadness smaller, but giving it a frame, something to hold the weight a little differently. There was a long way still to go. He knew that. She knew that better than he did, but they were here, in her kitchen, with his son reading her books in the next room, and the evening was long, and neither of them was alone in it. That, for tonight, was enough. The second attempt failed in August. Liam found out from a text, 3 words, no punctuation, didn't work again. And he sat with his phone in his hand in the parking lot of the Hendersons' house for a few minutes before he drove over. He didn't call first. He just went. She answered the door in the same clothes she'd probably been wearing all day. Dark trousers, a white shirt that had lost its crispness, and her face had the specific flatness of someone who has been managing their expression for hours and is tired of doing it. She looked at him standing on her porch and said, You didn't have to come. And he said, I know. And she stepped back and let him in anyway. He made coffee. She sat at the island and didn't help, which told him she was more depleted than she was showing because Victoria Sterling did not sit still in her own kitchen while someone else worked in it unless something had gone out of her. He made the coffee without talking and set it in front of her and sat down across from her and waited. I knew it might not work, she said finally. I keep telling myself I knew. Knowing doesn't help, he said. No, it really doesn't. She picked up the mug with both hands. Dr. Reyes wants to adjust the protocol. She said it's not unusual to need several attempts before... She stopped. Before anything happens. Okay. She pressed her lips together. I was so careful not to hope too much. I thought I'd hedged against it enough. You can't hedge against hope, he said. That's not how it works. You either hope or you don't, and if you don't, you've already quit. She looked at him. That's annoyingly accurate. I know. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, the August evening was heavy and still, the kind of heat that didn't move even after the sun went down. Tell me something, she said. Not a specific ask, just tell me something. Fill the space. Get me out of my own head for a minute. He thought about it. Ethan lost his first tooth today, he said. She looked up. How did that go? Badly. He was convinced it was going to hurt, so he kept not letting it happen. I had to pretend I wasn't going to pull it and then pull it, which felt dishonest, But the alternative was him being afraid of his own mouth indefinitely. The corner of her mouth moved. Did it hurt? He said it didn't. Then he cried anyway. Then he said he wasn't crying about the tooth, he was crying because he was hungry. And I don't know if that was true, but I let him have it. Good call, she said. He wants to show you. She looked at him. The gap, Liam said. He's very proud of the gap. He asked me if you'd want to see it, and I said I'd mention it. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. Tell him yes, she said. Obviously yes. He nodded, set down his mug. We're not giving up, he said, not as a question. She looked at him steadily. No, we're not. Okay, he held her gaze. Then that's what it is. We adjust and we try again. She exhaled, not dramatically, just the slow, measured release of someone letting down a weight they'd been carrying with their shoulders up. You're still being certain for me, she said. Somebody has to be. I'm going to feel it myself eventually, she said. I want you to know that. I don't need someone to carry it for me permanently. I know, I'm not trying to carry it. I'm just standing next to it with you. She looked at him for a moment, and it was one of those moments where he could see her deciding very quickly how much to let in. She usually kept it controlled. She was wired for controlled. But there were these flashes, increasingly frequent now, when the control slipped just slightly and he could see the actual person underneath, the one who was tired and hopeful and grieving and trying all at the same time. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. He stayed another hour. They didn't talk about the appointment or the protocol or the next steps. They talked about nothing important, which was increasingly, he thought, one of the most important things they did. The third attempt was in October, and the waiting period afterward was the worst yet. Not because anything went differently. The process, the timeline, the careful measuring of hope against expectation was the same, but because by now they both knew exactly what the waiting felt like. There was no novelty to cushion it. They knew the weight of it precisely, and knowing made it heavier. Liam threw himself into work during that stretch. He had 3 big jobs running simultaneously. A commercial kitchen refit that a restaurant owner had hired him to consult on, 2 regular residential clients, and a growing backlog of appliance repairs that he'd been letting accumulate. He worked long hours and picked Ethan up from school, and made dinner and helped with homework, and fell asleep most nights before 10, which was not his habit, but exhaustion was at least clean. Ethan, for his part, had become quietly attuned to the situation in the way children get attuned to things they're not told about directly. He didn't ask pointed questions. He just did things, asked to visit Victoria more often, reported to Liam with casual regularity about what she seemed to be doing, or whether her lights were on, brought her drawings from school with the same naturalness with which he might update a family member. The week of the waiting period, he made her a picture of the solar system, Saturn prominent, as was correct, and insisted Liam take it over immediately, not tomorrow, now. Liam knocked on her door with the picture and Ethan's reported instruction. It was for her office. Saturn was the best planet, and it should be somewhere she could see it. She unrolled it carefully and looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell him Saturn is in the best spot in the room." And Liam thought, "You are going to be such a good mother." He didn't say it, but he thought it with a conviction that surprised him. The results came on a Thursday morning. He was on a job, under a kitchen sink, which was not a dignified place to receive significant news, when his phone buzzed with her name. He pulled himself out, dried his hands on his jeans, and called her back standing in the client's hallway. She answered on the second ring. "It worked," she said. The 2 words landed in him like something dropped from a height. He leaned back against the wall. "It worked," he repeated to make sure he'd heard it correctly. "Dr. Reyes called an hour ago. The levels are where they should be. It's very early." Her voice had that careful quality he recognized, the one that wouldn't let itself get too far ahead. "She said we need to monitor closely. It's not." She was clear that early doesn't mean certain. But it worked. A pause. "Yes, it worked." He closed his eyes for a second.
Outside the hallway window, the October light was thin and gold and absolutely indifferent to the magnitude of what had just happened, the way light always was. "How do you feel?" he asked. A longer pause. "I don't know yet. I keep waiting to feel something definite, and instead I feel—" She seemed to search for it. "I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, and I don't know if I'm about to step onto solid ground or fall." "Both, probably," he said. "For a while." "Yes." Another beat. "Can you come tonight?" "Yes," he said. "Obviously, yes." He finished the job in a state of slightly altered focus. Functional, present enough, but with a part of his brain sitting separately in what she'd said. It worked. He thought about Sarah, briefly and without guilt, the way he'd learned to think about her, not as a complication to the present, but as a presence he carried that had its own place and didn't crowd out other things. Sarah would have had a lot to say about this. She would have said it loudly and in the wrong order. He allowed himself a moment of something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite gratitude, but lived somewhere between the two. Then he picked up Ethan from school. He didn't tell Ethan that evening. It was too early, the medical picture too uncertain, and 8-year-olds did not do well with information structured around contingencies. He filed it away carefully, and they drove to Victoria's house together, and Ethan immediately began telling Victoria about something that had happened at recess, involving a misunderstanding about whose turn it was at the handball wall, and Victoria listened with her full attention in that way she had, and Liam stood slightly back and watched the two of them together and felt the specific, complicated feeling of his life rearranging itself around something new. The weeks that followed were tense with a particular watchful quality. Every appointment with Dr. Reyes was a small, held breath. The numbers moved the right way. Slowly, then with more confidence, and by late November, when the first ultrasound image appeared on the screen at the clinic, small and blurred and unmistakably real, Victoria made a sound beside him that he'd never heard from her before. Not a cry exactly, something quieter and more fundamental than that. The sound of a wall that had held for 4 years finally coming down, not with a crash, but with a slow, exhausted release. He reached over and took her hand. She let him. They stayed like that for the rest of the appointment, him holding her hand and her not pulling it back. And Dr. Reyes professionally did not comment, and the technician professionally did not comment. And afterward, in the parking lot, Victoria stood in the cold November air and said, with the careful precision of someone who has just understood something large, "I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "Having something to lose." She wasn't looking at him. She was looking somewhere past the parking lot, past the line of bare trees at its edge. "I spent 4 years making sure I didn't have too much to lose. And now I do again, and I can't—" She stopped. "I don't know whether to be terrified or grateful." "You can be both," he said. "I think you're supposed to be both." She turned to look at him. The cold had put color in her face. Her dark eyes were bright in a way that was new. "You're going to have a daughter," she said. "We don't know it's a girl yet." "I know," she said. I think it's a girl." He looked at her. "I'm going to have a daughter," he said slowly, trying the weight of the words. She watched him work through it. "I have no idea how to have a daughter," he said. "I have no idea how to have a healthy pregnancy," she said. "We're even." Something in that, the plain, shared incompetence of it, made him laugh. Genuinely, suddenly, in the cold parking lot outside the clinic. She looked slightly startled, and then she laughed too. A short, surprised sound like she hadn't expected it to come out. And it was so rare, that sound from her, that he wanted to mark the moment somehow. He didn't. He just let it be what it was. They got back in the truck. He started the engine and the heater kicked on and they sat in the warmth for a moment before he pulled out. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. I think I've been feeling something for a while that I haven't said out loud." She was looking straight ahead. The lot was emptying around them, other cars pulling away, the ordinary business of people going places. "I told you in your kitchen, back in April, that it might be in the room. What you said about caring about me. I said it might be in the room for me too. I remember. I didn't know what to do with it then." She paused. "I still don't, entirely, but I think I should stop pretending it isn't growing into something, because I think it is, and you should know that.
Because you told me you wanted honesty. She finally looked at him. So, that's the honest thing. He sat with that. He was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, just wanting to be careful, because she had said a careful thing, and it deserved a careful response. I've been in love with you, he said, for a while now. I didn't say it because I didn't want to push anything into a shape it wasn't ready for, but I have been. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't easy to read. A collision of things, relief and fear and something else, something fragile and new. I don't know how to do this, she said, meaning, I don't know how to let someone in again. I lost the skill. I'm not sure I trust myself with it. Neither do I, he said. Not anymore. Sarah's been gone 3 years and I forgot how to do this too. He held her gaze. But I know I want to figure it out. With you specifically. She swallowed, turned back to the windshield. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, she said again, like she was agreeing to something large and was going to hold herself to it. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the lot, and she reached over without looking at him and rested her hand on the center console, not quite touching his, and he moved his hand slightly and her fingers settled over his knuckles. Loose, light, not dramatic, just there. He drove them home through the November afternoon, and neither of them said anything else. And the silence was the kind that holds something rather than lacks it. That night, after Ethan was in bed, Liam stood at the kitchen window for a long time. He thought about what was coming, the pregnancy, the uncertainty, the difficulty of the months ahead. He knew enough about Victoria to know that she wouldn't sail through it. She would be frightened, and she would manage the fear the way she managed everything, by making it efficient. And there would be moments when that broke, and she wouldn't know what to do with the breaking. And he would be there for those moments, and that would be fine, because she'd be there for his too. That was how it worked when it worked. He thought about Ethan asleep down the hall, about the conversation he'd need to have soon, about a sibling, a real one now, a coming one, not a hypothetical. He thought about Ethan's face when he'd asked, "Do you like her?" Like, actually like her. And said good when Liam admitted it. His son had been ahead of him the whole time. He'd seen it from the beginning, from across the street, from a garden they hadn't been invited to. She looked lonely. She had been. So had Liam. For years in different houses on the same street, in the particular silence that follows irreversible loss, each of them had been carrying something too heavy to carry and putting one foot in front of the other because there wasn't another option. He turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hall and stood in Ethan's doorway for a moment in the dark, listening to his son breathe in that complete, total way, the way you breathe when you're not afraid of anything right now. The dinosaur shirt had finally been retired and replaced with a new one, but it was still in the drawer because Ethan refused to throw it out, and Liam understood that impulse precisely. He went to bed and lay in the dark and thought, a daughter. He might have a daughter. He tried the thought from different angles, feeling for the catch, the point at which it stopped being real and became something too large to hold. But it held. It stayed real. Across the street, one window was still lit. He didn't text her this time. He just let the light be what it was. Proof that she was there, awake, probably in her office with something in her hands, and her mind running 3 tracks at once. Doing what she did when things were enormous. Work. Keep moving. Hold the shape. He thought, I love that about her, actually. He thought, I love a lot of things about her that I didn't expect to. He thought, this is going to be hard. And then, it's going to be worth it. And then he slept, which was its own kind of answer. 3 days later, he told Ethan. He sat him down after dinner at the kitchen table. The same table where they'd done homework and eaten birthday cake and had approximately 900 conversations about Saturn. And he said carefully that Victoria was going to have a baby, that the baby was his too, that Ethan was going to be a big brother. Ethan was very still for a moment, the way he got when something required real processing. Then he said, is it a boy or a girl? We don't know yet, Liam said. Too early. Ethan thought about it. I want a sister, he said. Why? Ethan shrugged with the confident illogic of an 8-year-old. Boys are loud. You're a boy. Yeah, Ethan said. So I know. Liam looked at his son across the kitchen table. Are you okay with this? Really? Ethan considered it with appropriate seriousness. Is Victoria going to be like our family now? Something like that, Liam said carefully. It's going to be different from what we have, but yeah, something like family. Ethan chewed on this. Then he nodded, a decisive, conclusive nod, like he'd done the math and it added up. Okay, he said. She's good at listening, and she gave me the plant book, and the Saturn picture is in her office. Liam waited. She's good, Ethan said finally, with the simple authority of a child who has made up his mind. She's good people, Dad. Liam breathed. Yeah, he said. I think so too. Ethan picked up his fork and went back to his dinner, the matter settled by his own private logic, moving on with the ease of someone who had been ready for this longer than his father had given him credit for. The window across the street was lit again that night, and Liam looked at it before he turned out his own lights, and he thought, we are four people moving toward each other from different distances, carrying different things, going towards something none of us completely knows the shape of yet. And somehow, that was all right. Somehow, that was enough to keep going. December arrived with the particular cold that settles into a city and doesn't apologize for itself, and with it came the first real obstacle that had nothing to do with medicine. The story broke on a Thursday. Liam found out the way he found out most things he hadn't been prepared for. From someone else, in this case Marco, who called at 7 in the morning while Liam was making Ethan's lunch and said, without preamble, "Have you seen the news?" He hadn't. He pulled it up while holding a butter knife in one hand, and there it was. A photograph, taken from some distance with a long lens, of him and Victoria in the parking lot outside the clinic. Not the day of the ultrasound. An earlier appointment, weeks back. She was facing him and he had his hand briefly on her arm, a steadying gesture, unremarkable in context, completely unreadable from outside it. The headline above it was the kind of headline that knew exactly what it was doing. Sterling Empire heir or calculated arrangement. Billionaire's mystery. Pregnancy and the man behind it. He set down the butter knife. Liam, Marco said, I see it. How bad is it? He scrolled. There were 3 more articles below the first, all running variations of the same basic framing. Victoria Sterling, 30, founder and CEO of Sterling Group, reportedly pregnant, the father identified as Liam Carter, a repair technician from her neighborhood. The word technician appeared in 2 of the 3 pieces with an italicized quality that wasn't actually italic, but felt like it. One article had found his business listing. Another had a quote from an unnamed source close to Victoria's board expressing concern about the company's leadership optics during a significant acquisition period. It's not great, he said. Have you talked to her? Not yet. She might not even be up. She's up, Marco said with a certainty that suggested he knew Victoria well enough by now, through Liam's descriptions, to make that call. People like her are always up. She was. She called him 4 minutes later while he was still standing at the counter. You've seen it, she said. Yeah. I'm sorry. I knew this was a possibility. I should have. I had security measures in place, but I didn't account for the clinic parking lot. That was my oversight. Victoria, I'm not mad about the photo. A pause. Okay. I want to know how you're doing, that's all. She was quiet for a moment, and he could hear the quality of her stillness through the phone, that particular held breath quality that preceded an honest answer. I'm angry, she said. Not at you, at the framing, the source. I have a good idea of who the source close to the board is, and when I'm less angry, I'll deal with it professionally. Right now, I'm just... She stopped. I'm angry that it happened at all. That we don't get to decide when things become public. No, he said. We don't. Are you okay? Your name is out there now, your business name. I'm fine. He thought about it. My clients don't read financial gossip columns. I'll probably get a few calls from people wanting to know if it's true. He glanced through the doorway at Ethan, who was eating his cereal and watching something on his tablet, unaware. I need to talk to Ethan before he hears it from someone at school. Yes? She said immediately. Of course. Do you want... She stopped herself. What? I was going to ask if you wanted me there, but that might not be the right call. He thought about it. Come over, he said. Be here when I talk to him. He should see that you know, and it's not some terrible secret. Another pause, shorter. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15. Ethan looked up from his tablet when she came in, mildly surprised, and then looked at his father, reading the room with the instinctive accuracy of a child who'd grown up watching his father's face for information. What happened? Ethan said. Liam sat down at the table across from him. Victoria stood slightly back, not removed, but giving Liam the front of it, which he appreciated. He explained it plainly. Some people had found out about the baby and written about it on the internet, and some of what they'd written wasn't very kind, and Ethan might hear things at school. He wanted Ethan to know first. He wanted Ethan to know the truth, which was that Victoria was having their baby and they were all going to be fine. Ethan listened with his chin on his hand. When Liam finished, Ethan said, "What did they say that wasn't kind?" "They made it sound like our family was something strange," Liam said, "like it didn't make sense." Ethan looked at Victoria, then back at his father. "But it does make sense," he said. "It makes sense to us." Liam breathed. "Yeah, it does." Ethan thought about it for another moment. Tyler Marsh's parents are divorced, and his dad has a new girlfriend, and nobody writes about that on the internet, he said, with the firm logic of someone identifying a genuine double standard. "You're not wrong," Liam said. "It's because she's famous," Ethan said, nodding at Victoria. "That's why." "That's exactly why," Victoria said from across the room. It was the first thing she'd said since she came in, and Ethan seemed to consider it definitive. "Okay," Ethan said, and returned to his cereal, the matter resolved in his estimation. And Liam had the thought, not for the first time, that his son's clarity was something he wanted to borrow more often. The fallout from the story was not dramatic, but it was persistent. Victoria's communications team released a brief, composed statement confirming the pregnancy and declining further comment. The board meeting she'd referenced with that careful, contained anger happened 2 days later, and she came to his house afterward looking like she'd been in a controlled demolition. Intact on the outside, interior rearranged. She sat at his kitchen table, and he put coffee in front of her, and she said, "Richard Holt, the unnamed source. He's been on my board for 6 years, and he's been angling for my chair since the first year. He saw this as leverage, proof that I'm distracted, personally compromised, making decisions that could affect the company's image during the Meridian acquisition." "What did you do?" Liam asked. "I removed him from the board," she said simply. "Just like that?" "I own 53% of the company," she said. "So yes." "Just like that." She picked up the coffee. "He'll make noise. He'll go to the press with a better version of the same story. I'm prepared for that." "Are you actually prepared, or are you saying you are?" She looked at him with an expression that was half exasperation and half something that might have been affection. "I'm about 60% prepared and 40% furious," she said. "But the furious is useful right now, so I'm running on it." "That sounds like you." "It is me." She drank the coffee, set the mug down. "There's something else." He waited. "My mother called," she said. "She read the story. She wants to meet you." Liam was quiet for a beat. "Your mother?" "She's 71. She lives in Connecticut. She's sharp as a blade, and she will absolutely form an opinion of you in the first 5 minutes and tell it to you directly, which is either charming or brutal depending on your tolerance." She paused. She adored Daniel. She still lights a candle for him every year on the anniversary. "How does she feel about—" He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "She's reserving judgment, which from her is practically a standing ovation." Victoria turned the mug in her hands. "You don't have to meet her yet. There's no pressure." "When does she want to come?" Victoria looked at him. "January?" "Then January," he said. She studied him. "You're not even going to think about it?" "I thought about it." "In 4 seconds." "I think fast." He met her eyes. "She's your mother. She's going to be the grandmother of our daughter. We don't know it's a girl yet." "Our daughter," he said again, firmly, "and I'm not going to avoid meeting her mother because it's slightly uncomfortable. That's not how this works." Victoria held his gaze for a long moment. Then something in her face went quiet and still in a particular way. Not withdrawn, but the opposite, like she'd stopped bracing for something. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. Outside, December was pressing itself against the windows. January brought Victoria's mother, Eleanor Sterling, who was 71 and had the bearing of a woman who had decided somewhere in her 60s that the remaining time should be used for complete honesty and not very much else. She arrived on a Saturday morning, was collected from the train station by Victoria's driver, and was in Liam's kitchen by 11, because Victoria had suggested they do this at his house rather than hers, on the grounds that it was warmer, which Liam understood to mean less intimidating, more human. Eleanor looked at his kitchen. She looked at the dish towel hanging slightly crooked from the oven handle, the coffee maker that had finally been replaced, the children's drawings held to the fridge with mismatched magnets, the particular comfortable disarray of a house that was actually lived in. Then she looked at Liam. "You're shorter than I expected," she said. "Mom," Victoria said. "He doesn't look short in the photographs," Eleanor said, not unkindly. The lighting was good. Liam put his hand out. "Liam Carter." Eleanor shook it. Her grip was firm. She held it for an extra beat, looking at him with direct, appraising eyes. "Eleanor Sterling. You can call me Eleanor. I don't do Mrs. anything." She let go and sat down at the kitchen table without being invited, which told him this was how she operated everywhere. "Make me coffee, please. Victoria's driver doesn't believe in conversation, and I've been sitting in silence for 40 minutes. He made her coffee. Ethan appeared from the living room, assessed Eleanor quickly, the way he did with all new people, and apparently decided she was not a threat, because he walked straight over and said, "Hi, I'm Ethan. Are you the grandma?" Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Victoria. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." She said it in a voice that was different from the one she'd used with Liam, softer, less testing. Then to Ethan, "Sit down. Tell me about yourself." Ethan sat down and told her about himself at considerable length. Saturn featured prominently. Eleanor listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asked questions, and received Ethan's answers with the respect of someone who takes children seriously, which Liam noted and filed away. He and Victoria stood at the counter together while this happened, slightly behind Ethan and Eleanor, close enough that her shoulder was almost against his arm. "She likes him," Victoria said quietly. "He's very likable," Liam said. "She doesn't like everyone." "I can tell." Victoria glanced at him sideways. "You're doing well." "She hasn't started on me yet. That was just the opening round." He was right. After Ethan had been dispatched to the living room with a biscuit from Eleanor's bag, she'd brought biscuits, which made her immediately and permanently elevated in Ethan's estimation. Eleanor turned to Liam with her coffee cup and said, "My daughter is the most self-sufficient person I've ever raised, which is both a source of pride and, at times, a source of worry. She doesn't let people in easily. You've managed it. I'd like to understand how." "I don't think I managed it," Liam said. "I think she let me in because she decided to. I just didn't push in a direction she didn't want to go." Eleanor considered this. "That's a careful answer." "It's a true answer." "Are you in love with her?" "Mom," Victoria started. "Yes," Liam said. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "And she's in love with you?" "You'd have to ask her." "I'm asking you." He met the old woman's eyes. "I believe she is," he said, "but it's still new for both of us, and we're not rushing it." Eleanor sat back, drank her coffee, looked between the two of them with an expression that was still evaluating but had moved toward something warmer. "Daniel would have liked you," she said finally. "He was good at recognizing honest people. He said it was an underrated skill." She set down her cup. "I miss him enormously. I want you to know that doesn't disappear." "I know," Liam said. "I carry someone too." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I can see that." She nodded slowly. "Good. That's good. People who've lost something know how to hold things carefully." The day ended well, which was not guaranteed. Eleanor spent an hour in the afternoon with her hand on Victoria's stomach,
talking to her in a low voice that wasn't meant to be overheard, and whatever she said made Victoria press her lips together and look away for a moment at the ceiling. Eleanor spent another half hour with Ethan going through the plant encyclopedia, and she turned out to know quite a lot about plants, and Ethan treated this knowledge with the deep respect he reserved for anyone whose expertise overlapped with his own. At the door, Eleanor shook Liam's hand again. "She needs someone who isn't afraid of her," she said. "Most people are afraid of her. It makes her lonely, and she manages the loneliness by working more, which makes more people afraid of her. It's a cycle." She held his hand for a moment. "Don't be afraid of her." "I'm not," he said. "No," Eleanor said. "I can see that." She patted his hand once, let go, and walked to the waiting car. The pregnancy moved through its second trimester with an intensity that surprised him, though in hindsight it shouldn't have. Victoria approached being pregnant the way she approached everything, with research, with systems, with the faint ongoing frustration of someone who likes to be in control of outcomes and has discovered that a human body does not operate on a boardroom schedule. She read everything. She had 3 doctors instead of 1, not because she mistrusted Dr. Reyes, she trusted her entirely, but because she was the kind of person for whom one data source was never quite enough. She tracked everything, calibrated everything, and then at 2 in the morning would text Liam something like, "The books disagree on sleep positions," and he would write back, "Sleep on whichever side feels right," and she'd write, "That's not a data-based answer," and he'd write, "No, it's a human answer. Go to sleep." She didn't always go to sleep, but she appreciated the answer. He could tell by the way she never argued with those particular responses. They moved her into the house in February. It was his suggestion, though not in the way of a romantic grand gesture, more in the way of a practical reality. She was 18 weeks along. The commute between their houses was getting increasingly inefficient given how much time they were spending together anyway. And his house, for all that it lacked in square footage and recently purchased furniture, had something hers didn't. It had been lived in, loudly and imperfectly and continuously, and it felt like a place where something was already growing. He offered it over dinner on a Tuesday. He said, "I think you should move in, not permanently, or permanently if that makes sense later, but for now, through the pregnancy and after, you should be here." She looked at him across the table. "That's your house. It would be your house too. Liam?" "Victoria." He held her gaze. "The house across the street is a beautiful, expensive, empty building. This one has Ethan in it and a broken towel rack I keep forgetting to fix and a drawer in the kitchen that doesn't close all the way. It's not impressive. But it's ours. It's already ours." He paused. "I want you in it." She was very still. Ethan, who had been ostensibly focused on his dinner, said without looking up, "There's room. You can have the big room. Dad can sleep on the couch." "I'm not sleeping on the couch," Liam said. "I meant the air mattress," Ethan said agreeably. Victoria looked at Ethan, then at Liam. The corner of her mouth moved. "I'm not taking your room," she said. "The couch it is," Ethan said. "Nobody is sleeping on the couch," Liam said. "We'll figure out the room situation." They did. It took a weekend and involved rearranging more than Liam had anticipated, and an argument about where the bookshelf should go that lasted 20 minutes and ended in a compromise that neither of them was fully satisfied with, which meant, as far as he was concerned, it was a fair outcome. Victoria arrived with 2 suitcases and 3 boxes of books, far more books than her small contribution to the shelf implied, and a single framed photograph that she placed on the nightstand of their shared room without comment. Daniel and Sophie. The same photo she'd shown him on that Thursday evening months ago, the warm-faced man and the grinning little girl. He noticed, and he didn't say anything. He'd said everything he needed to say about that photograph on the night she'd shown it to him. Ethan helped carry boxes with the dedicated seriousness of someone performing an important function, and at the end of the first day, when everything was in and the house was slightly chaotic with the reorganization of it, Ethan stood in the middle of the living room and looked around and then said, with the satisfied air of a project manager reviewing a completed installation, "This is better." "Better how?" Victoria asked. She was sitting on the couch with her feet up, slightly pale from a nauseous morning that had stretched into a nauseous afternoon. "Fuller," Ethan said simply.
Liam, carrying a box from the front door, caught Victoria's eye over Ethan's head. She looked like she was deciding whether to say something or just let it land, and then she chose to let it land, and the word sat in the room, fuller, and it was exactly right. The weeks that followed were the most ordinary of Liam's life in years, which was the last thing he would have predicted and turned out to be exactly what he'd needed. They had dinner together most nights, the three of them, and sometimes Marco, who had fully and without ceremony adopted Victoria into his extended orbit, and argued with her about coffee shop rankings with the comfortable ease of someone who'd known her for years rather than months. Ethan did his homework at the kitchen table. Victoria worked from the study that had been Liam's seldom-used spare room, and sometimes Liam would knock and bring her tea she hadn't asked for, and she'd take it without stopping what she was doing, and he'd leave. And those small, ordinary exchanges built into something over time that he didn't have a word for but recognized as the texture of a shared life. It wasn't uncomplicated. Nothing was uncomplicated. She had bad mornings and worse nights, and the anxiety she carried about the pregnancy, about losing it, about something going wrong, about the particular terror of someone who has lost a child before and knows precisely how irreplaceable they are, surfaced in different ways. Sometimes it was the 3 a.m. research spirals. Sometimes it was the way she went quiet and unreachable for an hour, and he'd find her sitting in the study with her hands in her lap and nothing open on her desk. He learned the difference between the quiet that needed company and the quiet that needed space, and he was wrong about which was which, often enough to require correction, and she gave him that correction without drama, which he appreciated. "I need you to ask," she said once. "Don't assume, just ask." "Fair," he said. "Are you okay right now?" "No," she said. "I'm scared." "Okay," he said, and sat down across from her and stayed there until the scared part moved through and she could breathe normally again. He was wrong sometimes. She was wrong sometimes. There was a fight in late February now. Real, heated. The kind where voices rise not because anyone is cruel, but because something has been held in too long and comes out wrong-shaped. It was about her work schedule, specifically about a series of back-to-back days she'd committed to that Dr. Reyes had gently, professionally suggested were not ideal. He pushed too hard, and she said that her body was hers, and her schedule was hers, and she didn't need to be managed, and he said he wasn't managing her. He was worried about her, and she said that worry wasn't the same as having a say, and he said he knew that, but could she just let him be worried without turning it into a negotiation? And she stopped, and there was a long quiet. Then she said, "I don't know how to let someone worry about me without feeling like I owe them something." He breathed. "You don't owe me anything." "I know that intellectually." "I know you know it intellectually," he said. She looked at him. "I'm working on the other part." "I know," he said. "I can see you working on it." They didn't resolve it neatly. They went to bed still slightly raw from it, and in the morning she'd adjusted her schedule, and she hadn't said anything about it, and neither had he. And he thought, that's what it looks like when two people who aren't good at this yet are trying their best. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was the most real thing in his life. The due date was late May, which meant that as the winter receded and the neighborhood started to green again, the same early pale green that had been outside the window the morning they'd first admitted what was in the room, the closeness of it became something physical. Victoria's body was changing in ways that were entirely outside her control, which she handled with a specific kind of resigned acceptance that was different from her usual self-possession, more reluctant, more honest. She complained about things she would ordinarily never have admitted to. She said her back hurt. She said she couldn't sleep. She said the baby had been pressing on something for 2 days, and it was making her furious, which was objectively funny, and also something he knew better than to say. In early April, 29 weeks in, she had a difficult week. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated. Not alarming, but enough for Dr. Reyes to ask her to slow down and mean it. She fought the slowing down with everything she had, and then, midweek, stopped fighting and sat in the garden on a Thursday afternoon with her coat on and Ethan beside her, the two of them looking at nothing in particular, and Liam watched them from the window for a moment. The woman who'd knocked on his door in a rainstorm with an impossible request, and his son who'd been ahead of him the entire time. He thought, we are so close now. He thought, I'm terrified. He thought, I'm here anyway. and he went outside and sat with them in the thin April light, the three of them quiet together in the garden that Ethan had helped put right nearly a year ago, waiting for the fourth person who was already on her way. The contractions started on a Wednesday morning in early May, 3 weeks before the due date. Liam was in the kitchen at 6:15, making Ethan's lunch when he heard her moving differently down the hall. Not her usual measured, purposeful stride, but something slower, more careful, the way you move when your body has begun doing something without your permission. He put down the sandwich and went to the doorway. She was standing in the hall with one hand on the wall and her eyes focused on some middle distance that wasn't the wall in front of her. "Victoria." "I'm fine," she said immediately. "You're not." "It might just be—" Dr. Reyes said there could be false— "How long?" She looked at him. "Since about 4. Since 4 in the morning." He said it flatly, with the specific tone of someone registering that information has been withheld for 2 hours. "It's 6:15. I didn't want to wake you until I was sure." "I want you to wake me," he said. "That is specifically one of the things I want you to wake me for." "I was timing them," she said, with the reasonable precision of someone explaining a logical process. "I needed data before—" "Victoria." He crossed the hall and put both hands on her shoulders, and she stopped talking. "Are you in pain?" A pause that was its own answer. "Yes." "Okay." He kept his hands where they were. "We're going." "Ethan, I'll call Marco. He'll be here in 10 minutes. He held her eyes. "You're allowed to need this, okay? You're allowed to need this right now." She looked at him for a moment. That particular look he'd come to know, the one where the managing and the actual person underneath were running very close together. And then she nodded. Once, small, deliberate. He called Marco, who answered on the second ring, sounding fully awake in the way of people who have been expecting a call for weeks. "Is it happening?" "Get here now," Liam said. 5 minutes, Marco said. He was there in 4. Ethan was up by then. He'd heard voices or felt the shift in the house, or operated on the same internal frequency he'd always seemed to have that picked up on things before they were explained. He appeared in the hall in his pajamas, hair sideways, and looked at Victoria and then at his father and said, "Is the baby coming?" "Think so," Liam said. Ethan considered this with remarkable composure for someone who had just woken up. Then he turned to Victoria and said, "Are you scared?" Victoria, who was in the middle of another contraction and managing it by staring at a fixed point and breathing in the way she'd learned at the class she'd attended with the focused determination she applied to all new skills, looked at him through it and said, when she could, "A little, yes." Ethan nodded. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "That's what Dad always tells me." Something moved through Victoria's face that was halfway between a grimace and something else entirely. She reached out and put her hand briefly on Ethan's head, a single, firm, deliberate touch. Then she said to Liam, "Let's go." Marco arrived as they were getting into the car, slightly out of breath, and took Ethan's overnight bag and Ethan himself with the easy efficiency of a man who had spent years in Liam's orbit and understood what was needed. He gripped Liam's shoulder once, hard, and said nothing, which was exactly right. The drive to the hospital took 23 minutes. Liam drove and Victoria sat beside him with her hands in her lap and timed her contractions on her phone. Because of course she did, and told him at intervals how they were progressing. Because of course she did. And he drove steadily and didn't tell her to stop timing because he understood by now that information was how she managed fear, and he wasn't going to take that from her. At one point, somewhere on the highway, she said, "I'm 37 weeks. "I know." Dr. Reyes said 37 is generally considered full term, he said. "I know, she told me too." A beat. "You asked her?" 2 weeks ago, yeah." She looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me you'd asked?" "Because you'd already researched it, and I didn't want you to think I was checking up on you." He kept his eyes on the road. I wanted to hear it directly. From her. About this specific pregnancy." A silence, and then, quietly, "That was very you." "Is that good or bad?" "It's good," she said. "It's very good." He reached over and took her hand for a moment and then put both hands back on the wheel because the exit was coming and he needed to concentrate,
And she didn't try to hold on, just let his hand go, which was also very her. No grasping, no asking for more than what was offered, even when she could have asked for more.
They got to the hospital and everything accelerated in the way hospital things do. The particular efficient chaos of intake, the bright lights, the people who know what they're doing and move with a velocity that is simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Dr. Reyes was there within the hour, calm and direct as always, moving through the numbers with the brisk accuracy that Liam had come to rely on across all those months of appointments. She was 37 weeks. The baby was in the right position. The labor was progressing. They were going to be here for a while. A while turned out to be 11 hours. Liam had been present at one birth before, Ethan's, which had been its own particular experience in a different chapter of his life, with a different person beside him and a different kind of love in the room. He remembered that he'd felt helpless then, helplessly peripheral to a physical process that was entirely Sarah's, able to hold her hand and say inadequate things and watch her do something enormous that he could only witness and not share. This time was different in some ways, and exactly the same in others. Victoria did not labor easily, and she did not pretend to. She was in real pain for most of it, and she was honest about the pain in a way that cost her, because she was not wired for admitting that something was beyond her management. There were moments when she gripped his hand so tightly that his fingers went briefly numb, and she didn't apologize for it, and he didn't ask her to. There were moments when the fear broke through the composure entirely. Not dramatically, not in pieces, but in these flashes where she'd look at him with an expression that was completely unguarded and completely terrified, and he'd hold her gaze and say, "You're doing it. You're here. I'm here." And she'd breathe and go back in. Around hour 7, she said, in the flat voice of someone at the edge of their reserves, "I keep thinking about Sophie." He moved closer. "Tell me." "I keep thinking I couldn't save her. I wasn't even there. She was 2 years old and I was in London and—" She stopped. The monitoring equipment beeped its steady rhythm. "What if I can't do this right? What if I—" "You're already doing it right," he said. "You've been doing it right for 37 weeks. That's different." "It's not different. It's exactly the same thing. You show up and you do the next thing that's needed. That's all it ever is." He held her hand. Sophie knew she was loved. You know she knew that. Victoria closed her eyes. "This baby already knows it too," he said. "Before she's even in the room, she already knows." A long breath, the kind that costs something. "Okay," Victoria said. "Okay." He stayed exactly where he was and didn't let go. Emma arrived at 6:47 in the evening in the long slanted light of a May day, with a cry that was disproportionately large for something so recently and improbably small. Liam heard it, and something in his chest broke open in a way that had no close equivalent in his experience, not like the first time, though that had cracked him wide too, but differently. This was its own thing. He was not watching alone this time. He was in it, exactly as present as anyone can be on the near side of something that had been, until a rainy night 18 months ago, entirely unimaginable to him. They put her in Victoria's arms first, as they should. He watched Victoria hold her daughter. He had seen Victoria compose herself under pressure. He had seen her manage grief, manage fear, manage a board of directors who had tried to use her pregnancy against her. He had seen her in the early hours of difficult mornings and at the far end of exhausted nights. He thought he had seen most of what she was made of. He hadn't seen this. She held Emma with the careful, trembling hands of someone who has been given something they were afraid they'd never get to hold again. And she looked at her daughter's face, the scrunch of it, the aliveness of it, the absolute unreasonable perfection of a face that had never seen light before. And she made that sound again, the one from the ultrasound room back in November, the quiet, foundational sound of a wall coming down. Except this time it wasn't partial. This time it was complete. Liam stood beside her and put his hand on her shoulder and looked at Emma and thought, "There you are. We've been waiting for you." When they placed Emma in his arms, he didn't say anything. He just held her. He had forgotten, in the years since Ethan, how particular this feeling was, the weight of something that is yours and vulnerable and impossible and real, all at the same time. Emma's eyes were unfocused and blinking, working out the business of being in the world, and he held her and thought of Ethan at this exact age, and thought of Sarah and thought of Sophie, and none of those thoughts competed with the moment, because grief and love do not actually cancel each other out, whatever anyone tells you. They live together in the same chest. They have to. "Hi," he said to Emma, quietly. "We've been working really hard to get you here." Emma blinked at the general vicinity of his face and made a small, unpunctuated sound that could have meant anything or nothing, and he decided it meant, "I know, I'm here now." They called Marco from the waiting room. Marco, who had been there for 2 hours with Ethan, who had apparently spent the afternoon producing detailed drawings of what he thought the baby would look like, came in first and looked at Emma in Liam's arms and said, in a voice slightly different from his usual one, "Look at that." "Yeah," Liam said. "She looks like you." "She's 4 hours old. She doesn't look like anyone yet." "She definitely looks like you," Marco said firmly. He put his hand briefly on Liam's back, the same grip he'd given him in the driveway that morning, solid and without ceremony, and then stepped back to let the room breathe. Ethan came in behind Marco, still in his school clothes from that morning, holding his drawings with both hands. He stopped when he saw Emma. He stood very still for a moment. Liam watched his son look at his daughter. Ethan was 8 years old, and in that moment he was also much younger and much older than that, the way children get sometimes when something real lands on them. He looked at Emma with an expression that Liam had never seen on him before, completely open, completely without performance, just seeing her. "She's really small," Ethan said. "She is," Liam said. "Do you want to hold her?" Ethan looked at him. "Can I?" "Yeah. Come sit over here." He settled Ethan into the chair beside the bed and showed him how to hold his arms, and then he placed Emma carefully into the curve of them, and Ethan went still in the way he went still around things he took seriously. Emma's eyes drifted toward his face, still unfocused, still working out the basic logistics of vision, and Ethan looked down at her with the kind of attention he gave to things he genuinely cared about. "Hi," Ethan said, very quietly, like it was just between them. "I'm your brother. I'm going to show you everything." A pause. "Except ceiling fans. Avoid those." Victoria made a sound from the bed that was a laugh and a cry in approximately equal measure. Liam stood between his son and the woman he loved in a hospital room in the early evening, with his daughter in his son's arms, and thought, this is the shape of it. This is what it looks like. Not perfect, not without loss or difficulty or the specific complicated weight of the people who aren't in the room, but real. Fully, completely, irreversibly real. Eleanor arrived the next morning. She came directly from the train, still in her coat, and walked into the room and went straight to the bed where Victoria was holding Emma, and she stood over them for a long moment without speaking, which was unlike her, and then she sat down carefully on the edge of the bed and held her granddaughter and didn't say anything for a while, and Victoria rested her head briefly on her mother's shoulder, and Liam took Ethan out to get something from the vending machine to give them the room, and he stood in the corridor and leaned against the wall and felt the particular, specific weight of a long thing finally landing. They went home 3 days later. Not to the house across the street. That house had been empty since February. The lights off. The garden tended by someone Victoria paid to tend it. Home meant Liam's house, which had become their house in the months since she'd moved in, quietly and without announcement, the way things become real when they're lived in rather than declared. The house with the drawer that still didn't close all the way, the towel rack that Liam had eventually fixed in March, the fridge magnets holding Ethan's drawings, the bookshelf where the compromise about placement still wasn't perfect but had been accepted. Ethan had, in the 3 days they'd been at the hospital, decorated Emma's room. Under Marco's supervision and with Marco's labor, he had added a string of small paper stars along one wall, cut by hand, each one different, and a drawing of Saturn taped above the crib because, as he explained with complete seriousness, she should know about Saturn early. It's important information. Victoria stood in the doorway of Emma's room with Emma against her shoulder and looked at the stars on the wall and the drawing above the crib, and she pressed her lips together and breathed slowly through her nose, and Liam stood behind her and she leaned back against him, and he put his arms around both of them.
He made those himself, she said. All of them, he said. Took him 2 afternoons. She was quiet. He said she should have something that came from someone who loved her before she got here, Liam said. Victoria turned slightly and looked at him over her shoulder. You told him to say that. I did not. That was entirely his own thinking. She turned back to the room. He's remarkable. I know. You made a remarkable person. Sarah and I did, he said. Simply, without awkwardness, because there was no awkwardness anymore in naming her, in placing her correctly in the story. Sarah was part of this.
She was in Ethan, and therefore in this room, and in this house, and in the stars on the wall that their son had cut out with his hands. That was how love worked when you let it. It didn't vacate. It built. Victoria reached up and put her hand over his. They stood in the doorway of their daughter's room in the ordinary late afternoon light, and Emma slept against Victoria's shoulder with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided she is exactly where she belongs. And outside in the backyard, Ethan was explaining something at length to Marco, probably Saturn, and the ordinary sounds of it all, the voice, the distance, the particular quality of a late spring afternoon coming through an open window, settled around them like something you don't have a word for because it's too simple and too enormous at the same time. Home, maybe. That was the word. The months that followed were not a montage. They were not uniformly golden. They were the specific, uneven, frequently exhausting experience of 2 imperfect people learning to be a family, which meant they were sometimes harder than either of them expected, and occasionally harder than either of them handled well. Emma was a noisy baby who did not believe in predictable sleep schedules, a detail that tested Victoria's systems thinking in ways no board meeting ever had. There were nights when Liam was up twice and Victoria was up 3 more times in between, and they'd pass each other in the dark hallway with the specific wordless acknowledgement of people who are too tired for language but still glad the other person is there. There were days when Victoria went back to work and felt guilty about it in a way she hadn't anticipated, because she had never been someone who felt guilty about work, and this new layer of herself surprised and occasionally irritated her. There were days when Liam's patience ran shorter than he wanted it to, and he'd raise his voice at something minor, and then feel the familiar flash of self-recrimination, the one he'd learned to move through rather than stay in. Ethan adapted to Emma with a thoroughness that should not have surprised Liam but did anyway. He was gentle with her in a way that was entirely unprompted. He hadn't needed to be asked or instructed, had just arrived at it on his own, as though he'd decided before she was born what kind of brother he was going to be, and was now simply being it. He talked to her constantly, narrating things for her the way Liam had always narrated things for him, telling her about planets and plants and the various injustices of the handball wall situation. She could not understand any of it. She seemed to like the sound of his voice anyway, which he considered confirmed. Victoria sold the house across the street in August. She did it without drama, listed it, handled the offers through her real estate team, told Liam one evening over dinner that it was under contract. He asked if she was sure. She said yes in a way that didn't require elaboration. He didn't elaborate. The house across the street had been beautiful and expensive and empty, and it had served its purpose, which was to bring her to his door on a rainy night with an impossible request, and now it could be someone else's blank beginning. She proposed to him in September. He had not been expecting it, which was, in retrospect, typical of her. She did things on her own timeline and her own terms, and she had clearly decided that the terms were right, and the timeline was now, and so she acted. It was a Sunday morning. Emma was 6 weeks old and asleep in her bouncer on the kitchen floor. Ethan was at a friend's house. Liam was doing the dishes, which had become something he did with a contentment that still mildly surprised him, and Victoria came into the kitchen in her Saturday clothes, jeans, a soft shirt, no shoes, and said his name. He turned around. She was holding something small. Not a box, not a presentation, just a ring held between her fingers, a simple thing, a single dark stone set plain, nothing theatrical about it. I bought this last week, she said. I had it in my coat pocket for 7 days. I kept starting to do this and stopping because I kept thinking I should plan it better or wait for the right moment. And then this morning I thought, this is the right moment.
The ordinary Sunday morning is the right moment. We're standing in our kitchen and the baby is asleep, and this is exactly what I want the rest of my life to look like. She looked at him steadily, with that particular look he knew, the controlled surface and the genuine, slightly terrified person underneath. So, Liam Carter, you fixed my garden and fed me pasta and were certain for me when I couldn't be, and held my hand for 11 hours in a hospital, and I have been... She stopped, steadied. I have been trying to figure out how to deserve what you've given us for months. I don't know if I've figured it out yet, but I know I want to keep trying. She held out the ring. Will you marry me? She said it without the rise at the end. Not a question exactly, a statement she was offering him the opportunity to confirm. He looked at her, at the ring, at the woman who had stood in the rain on his porch and changed the shape of everything. He thought about saying something eloquent. He thought about the last 18 months, the Thursday evenings, the clinic parking lots, the garden, the hospital room, the paper stars on Emma's wall, the kitchen drawer that still occasionally stuck. He thought about how none of it had been smooth or certain or easy, and how that was precisely why it was real. He crossed the kitchen, took the ring from her hand, and set it on the counter. She blinked. He took her face in both hands and kissed her, which he had not done enough of and intended to correct. When he stepped back, she was looking at him with an expression that was not quite her usual composure and was much better for it. Yes, he said. Obviously, yes. She let out a breath that she'd clearly been holding since she walked into the kitchen, maybe longer. He picked up the ring and put it on her finger. It fit. He had not expected to feel anything particular about that detail and felt something particular about it anyway. You had it in your coat for a week, he said. 7 days. That's a long time to carry something in your pocket. I was managing, she said. I know, he said. You always are. She looked at the ring on her hand. I wasn't sure you'd want... Victoria. She looked at him. When have I ever given you the impression that I didn't want this? She thought about it. Never, she admitted. Never, he confirmed. Emma, from the bouncer on the floor, made a sound that was either a comment or a digestion noise. They both looked down at her. She blinked at the ceiling with the serene disinterest of someone who had weightier matters to attend to. She approves, Liam said. She's looking at the light fixture. Approvingly, Victoria looked at him. The controlled surface was still there, because it was part of her and would always be part of her. But underneath it and through it and visible in the lines around her eyes and the set of her mouth was the other thing. The enormous, quietly astonished thing. The thing that had been sealed off for 4 years and was now irrevocably open and had discovered that being open was survivable, was more than survivable. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They were married in November, which was the same month they'd held hands in a clinic parking lot and first admitted, without saying it exactly, that something between them had become too large to be an arrangement. The wedding was small. Liam's kitchen and backyard, 30 people, Marco as best man, Eleanor in the front row with Emma in her arms, looking pleased with herself in a way that suggested she had known how this would end since the day she shook Liam's hand at the door. Ethan stood beside his father in a shirt he'd chosen himself and shoes he'd agreed to polish only under protest, and during the vows he watched his father and Victoria with the particular, unguarded attention that he gave to things he cared about, not performing any emotion, just receiving it, holding it. The vows were not elaborate. They had talked about what they wanted to say for a few weeks and arrived, independently, at the same general position. Simple, true. Nothing that reached for something bigger than what was actually there, which was already, they both felt, quite large enough. Liam said, I don't know what the next years look like. I know I want to find out with you. I know our family is real, and I know I will show up for it every day, not perfectly, but present. That's the promise. Victoria said, I spent 4 years making sure I didn't have too much to lose. You taught me, by example and by being exactly who you are, that living that way is a kind of dying. I intend to have too much to lose for the rest of my life. I intend to lose sleep over it and fight about the bookshelf placement and be uncertain and scared and completely here. With you. That's the promise.
Ethan, from beside his father, said quietly, "Good vows." And then, to Marco, in a whisper clearly audible to the nearest 3 rows, "I told you she was good people." There was laughter, the real kind. Here's what Liam would have told you if you'd asked him afterward what he'd learned. He would have told you that the most important things that ever happened to him arrived through doors he didn't expect. The door of loving Sarah, the door of losing her, the door of raising a son who paid attention better than he did, and the door at 9:47 on a rainy Wednesday night when a woman in a wool coat stood on his porch and asked him for something impossible. He would have told you that he'd spent 3 years after Sarah's death putting one foot in front of the other because that was the only available option, and he had thought, without articulating it, that that was what the rest of his life would be. Not unhappy, not broken, just the forward motion of someone who had received their best thing early and was now simply continuing. He would have told you that he was wrong, but not in the triumphant way people say they were wrong about something. In the quiet, slightly humbled way of someone who has discovered that life has a longer game than you give it credit for. That the people you love don't vacate when you lose them. They become part of how you love the next person, part of what you recognize and what you offer. Sarah had made him capable of sitting in a kitchen with a grieving woman and knowing, without being told, when to talk and when to just stay. She had made him a person who could be steady for someone else. He carried her forward into this, and it wasn't sad. It was just true. He would have told you about Victoria. Not the version from the financial profiles, not the figure behind the glass wall across the street, but the one who timed her contractions for 2 hours before waking him, who kept a ring in her coat pocket for 7 days, who learned to let someone worry about her without turning it into a transaction, who put a photograph of her late husband on their shared nightstand, because love is not a competition, and the people we've lost don't leave the room just because new people enter it. He would have told you about Ethan, who is 9 years old now and growing in the particular direction that children grow when they feel secure, outward, with confidence, toward things. Who had decided before anyone told him to that he was going to be a good brother, and was. Who had told Victoria she was good people before Liam had figured out how to say it himself. He would have told you about Emma, who was learning to grab things, fingers, shirt collars, the corner of Ethan's precious plant encyclopedia, which caused a brief crisis, and whose laugh when it came was startling in its completeness. Whole body, all in. The laugh of someone who hadn't learned yet to hold anything back. He would have told you that he had not planned any of this, that plans, in his experience, were mostly the stories you told yourself about the future until the future came and turned out to be something else entirely. That the useful thing was not the plan but the willingness. To open the door, to stay in the kitchen, to sit in the garden in April and wait for someone who is on her way. That the family you fight for is not the same as the family you're handed, but it is no less real for that. Maybe more, because you know exactly what it cost. Because there were 100 points at which it could have gone differently and didn't, and each of those points was a choice someone made. To stay, to speak, to be honest, to keep trying, to be certain when the other person couldn't manage it. The house had a ceiling fan now, actually. Victoria had put one in the study during a renovation in the spring, and Ethan had walked in, assessed it, crossed his arms, and said with resigned acceptance, "I can close that door." And he had, and he did, and he was fine, and that was how it went. The things that scared you didn't always go away, but the house got bigger around them. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, about a year after the wedding, Liam stood at the kitchen window doing the dishes the way he always had. The window, the dark yard, the familiar weight of the ordinary, except the ordinary was different now. Emma was in the next room with Victoria, who was reading to her from the plant encyclopedia, which Emma could not understand and found deeply soothing as a sleep aid, which offended Ethan slightly on the book's behalf. Ethan was at the table behind Liam doing homework with the focused intensity he brought to things he cared about. Outside, a light rain had started, the kind that tapped on the window without urgency, the kind that, a little over 2 years ago, had brought a woman across the street in a wool coat with an impossible request and an expression like something held together by effort. Liam listened to the rain and the sound of Victoria's voice in the next room, low and steady, reading about root systems and soil types, and the particular needs of plants that grew in difficult conditions. He listened to Emma's breathing slow into sleep. He listened to the scratch of Ethan's pencil. He thought, this is the thing. Not the dramatic version. Not the version with the clear narrative arc and the clean resolution. Just this. The dishes, the rain, the people in the next rooms doing ordinary things, the specific, unremarkable, irreplaceable texture of an evening that belongs to you. He thought, Sarah would have approved of this. Not given permission. He'd stopped needing permission. But she would have looked at this kitchen and these people and this life. And she would have said yes. That's the right thing. That's the right next thing. He thought, I didn't build this because I stopped loving what I lost. I built this because I did. Outside, the rain continued its quiet business. Inside, Victoria turned a page. Emma sighed in her sleep. Ethan said, without looking up, Dad, can you check this math? In a second, Liam said. He stood at the window a moment longer, not because anything was happening, because everything was. And then he dried his hands and turned around and went back to his family.